And in fact, your last assignment of the semester relates to inheritance. And in fact, I think that the assignment that relates to inheritance, I've gotten things mixed up now, but I think it's actually an optional assignment. And so all of your assignments for the semester, as was indicated in the email I sent out yesterday, you have everything now. So nothing new will be added by way of assignments. And so once you plow through those and get them finished, you're done with your homework for this class for the term. Any questions before we jump into this topic of object inheritance in ABAP?
The final, was that cumulative with the beginning of the semester?
Yes. Other questions? All right, so we don't have a lot of new syntax to take on in this discussion, although there is some of that, but mainly there is some concepts for us to work through, and I think you will find that inheritance in ABAP works very similar to inheritance in other languages, with just a few refinements added by ABAP. So the idea of inheritance in object-oriented programming is it allows us to group together things that are similar into a hierarchy, where we would have a general class and then another class that extends that class, adding more features, meaning adding more attributes, adding more methods, and so on. And so the scenario that you have is you have a parent class, which is a general representation of a thing, a vehicle. The example that we're going to do here is going to be a document, a geometric shape, and the parent class contains those attributes and methods which are common to every object of this sort. So in the example that we're going to do, we will have a parent class of a document, and the attributes and methods that we will define will be true for all documents in our system. And then you have the ability to create child classes, which are more specific instances of the parent. And the idea here is that the child has everything that the parent has, but then has the ability to add things to it. So for example, the parent class might be a document, and a child class might be a purchasing document, or an accounting document, or a material document. And each of those different kinds of documents, purchasing, material, accounting, would add its own attributes and its own methods that relate to its particular type of document. And in fact, you could have further chain in the hierarchy. For an accounting document, you could have a child of that would be a financial accounting document versus a controlling document versus a cost accounting document. And then those might add even more specific attributes and methods to support what is being desired. So the idea here is, if you were to work your way from bottom to top in this hierarchy, you would see that you have a relationship, which is a way of saying that if we look at what I just talked through as being a hierarchy, you could say a financial accounting document is a kind of accounting document, which is a kind of document. And so as you work your way up the hierarchy, everything is related. And so as you traverse down the hierarchy, everything gets more specific. So for example, if we were doing geometric shapes, the parent might be geometric shape, the child could be polygon, and then a child of polygon could be a square. And another child of polygon could be a rectangle, and another one could be trapezoid. And so the idea is a trapezoid is a kind of four-sided object, which is a kind of geometric object. And so we see that kind of hierarchical relationship. terms that we commonly use for this, and you've done hierarchical class inheritance in other languages, I'm sure. The idea is that the parent class is often referred to as the superclass, the child class is referred to as the subclass, and although in what I'm showing you here on the PowerPoint slide, we only show a parent and a child, you can keep working down the tree, and a child could have its own children, and so on and so forth, and there's no limit to how tall or how wide this particular diagram could be. The key element, though, is, and this might be on the next slide, ABAP only has single inheritance. So you will only see one parent for each child. And so that's what's reflected in the diagram you see here. My diagram that I'm showing you is based on the common UML notation for class hierarchies, which will show in these PowerPoint slides. So, for example, we might have a document class. This is what I was just mentioning. And that document class, every document would have a document number, it would have a date, and it would have a document type. And then it would have a set of methods to support that. A PO document would have a document number, a date, a document type, but it would also have a vendor ID, a company code, and a delivery date. A sales document would have a document number, a date, and a document type. It would also have a customer ID, a company code, a fulfill by date. Obviously, in a real-world scenario, all three of those classes would probably have a lot more attributes and a lot more methods than are shown, but this is a good representation of a hierarchical scenario, and one that we will work through in our time here together. Just to kind of reinforce or reiterate what I've said, the idea here is, as I look at an inheritance or hierarchical situation, the things that are in common, the things that we want everyone to share, are defined in the superclass or the parent, and the idea is that all of the children of that parent, all of the subclasses of that superclass are going to have the attributes and methods that are defined in the parent. And so what this does is this avoids redundant definitions. This allows me to create classes which are similar to one another, but different in their own distinct ways, without having to rewrite a lot of the same code over and over and over again. What this does is this promotes what's often called programming by difference, where you say, okay, I already have a document class. I want everything that's in that document class, but I want to add more stuff to it. Well, that's easy to do. Just create a child of the document class and then add the other things that you want added on top, and all the stuff that was there before is still there before. As I mentioned a moment ago, in ABAP, we only have singular inheritance. So a subclass can only have one parent class. That's pretty common. There are programming languages that support multiple inheritance. It gets a little bit more complicated potentially. We don't have to worry about that in ABAP. So let me ask you one question, and then we'll jump into and start working through an example here. In comparing the superclass and the subclass, which is the more specific class? The superclass or the subclass? Subclass, good. Knowing that is probably going to get you 2 or 3 points on your final exam, because I'll probably ask you that question 2 or 3 different ways to make sure you have a good understanding of it on the final. So let's write some code together here real quickly this morning, and we'll try and keep this fairly brief, but this will also be a good opportunity for us to review some things as it relates to our object-oriented programming. And so we're going to create a document class. And so I've started writing that already. And so we will add a public section to our definition here. And I want to introduce something into this class that we've talked about, but we haven't actually written into any code so far. I want there to be a document counter that keeps track of how many documents have been created in my program. Well, the easy way for me to do that is by creating a static attribute, or ABAP calls that a class attribute, and the specific syntax that we use is class data. So I'm going to create a data object attribute here called num documents, and it's going to be just an integer, and the first time it gets created, it'll be set to a value of 0. Now, I could put a period there, and this is syntactically correct, but it's not fully correct. What am I missing in my code there on line 11? And the reason why I'm making a big deal out of this is I think about 3/4 of the class messed up on this on the last homework assignment. When we have a public attribute, what do we always need to remember? Read only. There we go. So now I'm going to have a document counter here that I can employ here, and then I need some just regular attributes, and so I'll have a data statement, and I want every document to have a number. That's a pretty realistic thing for us to have, and we'll make this document number a numeric string, and I'm just going to arbitrarily decide that we're going to have 6-digit document numbers, and we'll make that read-only. And then documents need dates, so we'll do a date and make that type D, and that is, of course, read only. And then we'll add something here called the document type, which will just be a single letter code. So this could be like A or X or Q to describe what kind of document this is, and we'll make this read-only as well. Now the fact is, this is not a very complete set of attributes, because right now I have a document that has a document number, a date, and a document type, but no contents, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. But in fact, in a hierarchical situation, this might be all we would want here. And then in the children, they would inherit these attributes and then add the contents that would be reflective of what the contents would be of a purchasing document, or a sales order document, or a accounting document, or what have you. So continuing on here, my class is going to need some methods, and so let's talk about those for a moment. I am going to need a constructor, and in my constructor, I want to be able to set the document number, the date, and the document type by way of parameter passing. I'm not going to set num documents by way of a parameter. The system's going to have a counter to keep track of that. The num documents data object will be used for that. But I am in my constructor wanting to have some importing parameters, and they're just going to match up with what we see here. I want a doc number, which would be type N, and then I want a date, which would be type D, and I'm going to have it default to the current date, so that if the user doesn't pass in a date, we just assume that today is the date that's supposed to be put on the document. What would I put here for the default value if I want it to default to today? Anybody remember?
System.
Right idea. Yeah, the actual is SY datum. We'll do that. And then for doc type, we're going to do this type, and just to make our coding a little bit easier, we'll say that the default document type is A, unless it has been set to something different, and I missed my actual type here, which is type C, length 1, and type C, length 1. Oh, it's complaining because I misspelled the word length. Length 1. I'm trying to figure out why it is. Oh, I don't have to, I don't put the length here. There we go. All right, so I have the framework here for my constructor. If we think about other methods that I might need here, let's just, for example, create a method called set doc number, which will, and I got to clean up my indenting to make this look like it should, and set doc number would importing doc number type n, and I'm using, in case you haven't figured out what's going on here, I'm using chaining for this, so this should actually be a comma. And then we'll do, just for to keep, I want to keep this simple but make this realistic, we'll do set date, importing date type D, and then the last and perhaps most important is we'll have a method called display document, which has no parameters but will write the document out to the screen. All right. Any questions about what we've done here so far?
You want to set that to importing date instead of data on the line above?
Thank you. I will probably make that typo a few more times before we're done. I could do a syntax check right now, but I know it's going to complain because none of my methods have been defined. So before we do our first syntax check, let's go ahead and write some method definitions. And so my first one up is my constructor. And so I'll go ahead and put that in. And my constructor is going to do what most constructors do, in that it's going to make a lot of attribute assignments. And so it's going to manage the doc number. So me doc number equals doc number, and me date equals date, and me doc type equals doc type. And there's one last thing I need my constructor to do, and what's that?
Increment the counter.
Yeah, it's got to manage the document counter, and my document counter attribute was called num documents. So this is going to be num documents equal num documents plus 1. So pretty straightforward constructor of the sort that you have been writing and will be writing in upcoming classes that you will be defining. And so there's that. Other classes or other methods I have here are pretty straightforward. Method set doc number is going to look, really, it's going to be just this line right here. So I will just copy and paste that there. That's what that particular method will do. And then method set date is the same idea. It's just this line to allow me to set the date. For some reason, I didn't have a set doc type method to allow me to reset that, but that's fine. It probably should be included for sake of completeness, but to keep this quick for us to work through in class, I just haven't put that here. But then the set or the display document method is one that's really important. And so method display document, and so this is going to write some things out to the screen. So I want to write out on a new line here the string we'll just abbreviate here, doc number colon, and then we'll skip over to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We'll skip over to column 15 and write out the doc number, and then write date, and skip over to column 15 and write out the date, and then write doc type, and skip over to column 15 and write out doc type, and then we'll go ahead and write out the number of documents as well. Number of docs, and that might be longer than 15 characters right there. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah, so let's bump this out to 20. All right, so now comes the magic moment when we do our first syntax check. And thanks to your help in spotting the couple of mistakes I did make, we have no syntax errors here. So this is going to be our ultimate parent in our hierarchy here. And so let's write some code here to test this out. So I have start of selection, and then I need to create one of these, so someone tell me what I need to type to create a document here.
Something like a variable name for top reference of.
Okay, so I need a data statement, and I'll call this here doc1, type ref2 document. And then to actually create one of these guys, I need the code for creation. Create object doc1. Now, if we look at my constructor, we have 2 default parameters, but doc number has to be set. So at minimum, when I call this, I'm going to have to give it a document number, and so create object doc1 document number, and is that the name of the attribute? Doc number. And we'll just declare that the document number here is 1473. Okay, and we can see that I have syntax error here. So what have I done wrong?
Carry the period down to the next line.
Exporting.
Well, it's because of I have a parameter here. So it's been suggested I add exporting here, and that seems to have gotten rid of the red here. So let's check our code, and we pass check. And so now let's the ultimate test here is going to be if we call the display document method. And so let's see what we actually get. And then we'll be ready to start doing our inheritance. Okay, so common mistake here that I have seen in programs before fairly recently, and it is that guy is needed there for num documents so that we get rid of the extraneous spaces, and now everything lines up. There's my document. You'll notice I didn't take time to adjust the formatting of the date, but it does correctly show today's date of April 18th, doc type A, number of documents 1. Let's go ahead and just for the completeness of what we're doing here, we really need to create a second document so as to test out the constructor more fully, and so we will, oops, I should have grabbed the data statement too. We will create another document here called doc2. We will create doc2. We will set the document number to 1, 2, 3, 4, and we also need to, for this one, we'll set the doc type just to test that, and so doc type equals Q. And then this should be doc2. All right, so we have our two objects here. I'll, for the next time we run this, I'll drop a horizontal line into output between them so that we see that. But now the issue becomes I want to create a child of this. So how do I do that? So here's the syntax. In the child class, we add inheriting from and then the name of the parent into the first line of the class definition. So we might see an example like this: class PO document definition, and then we just add to it inheriting from document. Now, the key thing to note is the inheriting class cannot delete anything from the parent. So if I do create a child of this class, the child of this class is going to have a document number, a date, and a document type, and it will have all the methods that you see listed there. The num documents, because it's class data, it's shared in common with all of the classes or all the objects that are created, so the child would have access to that as well. So the inheriting class cannot delete anything from the parent, but it can redefine method implementations. When redefining a method's implementation, I cannot change the parameter passing. And I cannot change the visibility. And by that I mean, if it was public before, it still has to be public. So what I'm telling you is, for example, I could redefine the set doc number method if I wanted to or needed to. But it still has to be public, and it still can only take in a document number. Now, let's say, for example, that in my organization, we require all of our purchasing documents to start with the number 1. So I might need a set doc number method that enforces that. And if the user tries to create a document that doesn't have a 1 as the first digit, it would not create the object. So that's the idea there. I could change and introduce a new set doc number method, but it has to have the exact same parameter passing as the parent, and it has to be public just like the parent's was. If I'm going to redefine a method, I note this as being a redefinition. And since the interface is already defined in the parent, it's not listed again because I can't change it. Okay? So, do I want to redefine any of the methods in this? Well, one of the things that I might want to do is I might want to, in my child class, I can add new things. And so let's do that here. So let's create, go back here to the end of my document class. And we are going to do class, and we'll do the same thing that I put here. We'll call it purchasing document, and then definition, just like we always do. But then we add to that inheriting from document. So in fact, even if I just stopped right now, this is syntactically valid. And I could save this, and I in fact could create purchasing documents. But the purchasing documents would be identical to the parent. There'd be no distinction whatsoever. So clearly, if I'm wanting to pursue this, I want to add some things to my purchasing document. So I can add new stuff. So let's do that. Let's add some attributes here. So I'll have a data statement just like we always have in a class. Oops, I'm missing the public section. And then we'll have a data statement here. And we'll keep this once again as we did with the one up top there, pretty straightforward. Let's add a purchasing document has a vendor ID, type C, length, I seem to have trouble spelling that this morning, 2, and we don't want to forget our good friend read only. And we'll create another company code, type C, length 2, read only, and we'll just leave it at that. We could add some more attributes here, but you get the idea. So here's the key thing. How many attributes does a purchasing document have? And the answer to that is not 2. It has 6. It has 2 more than the document class had. So document had 4. So now purchasing document has 6. So I have that. Okay, now I can add some methods. And so what I will want to do is I want to look at, and we'll come back to the constructor in a moment because I am going to want to do some things with the constructor. But do I need to change the set doc number method? No, it'll still work fine for the child. Set date, don't really need to do anything with that. It works fine for the child. But display document is one that needs to be redefined because I have more attributes to display here. So I would put down methods and then the name of the method, display document, and this is a redefinition. Now, I don't list parameters because I can't change parameter passing. And in fact, if you look at this, my display document method in my parent has no parameter passing anyhow. So this is a very, very easy scenario here. And if I wanted to, I could add new methods. And we'll do one of those just for the sake of illustrating this. I will add the methods set vendor ID, and we need to do the parameter passing for that, and so this would be importing vendor ID type C. Okay, and this is all we're going to do for right now. And like I said, we need to address the constructor, which we'll do in just a moment. But for right now, the issue now becomes, okay, so that's my public section. I don't have a private section. This is my definition for this class. So let's work on the implementation. So class purchasing document implementation. I don't put inheriting from because that's already been taken care of in the definition. All right, and so the only thing that I have to do here is I have to write the set vendor ID method. So let's do that first. and I'm going to save myself a little bit of typing by just coming up and stealing this guy right here and bringing it down. And so this will be method set vendor ID, and here me vendor ID equals vendor ID. So in the child, the methods look exactly like they do, but then we have this issue of what do I do about the method that I am redefining. And so I just method and then display document. I don't have to list the redefinition keyword because that's already specified in the definition. And so I could, well, what I need to do here is I need to define my new behavior for display document. Now, if we look at the behavior of the parent display document method, we see that it writes out the document number, the date, the document type, and the number of documents. So let's assume I want all of that to still happen, but then I want to add to that list the vendor ID and the company code. I could come up here and copy this and paste it down in my newly defined display document method. And while that wouldn't be wrong, that's not really good coding practice. What I want to do instead is leverage the fact that I already have a display document method. So let's go back to our PowerPoint slides here. If I want to call a method of the parent, such as when you want to use the original method as part of the method's redefinition, we use the keyword here, super. So I could do this. In my display document method for the child, what I want to do is I want to call the parent's display document method. So super display document. So now it's going to do all the things that the parent document display document method did. And then to save myself a little bit of typing, I'm going to come up here and grab this guy. Whoops, that was not the right key. C. Try that again. C. And after I display the things that were there before, I want to write out what are my attributes here. I want to add a vendor ID. And the company code. So this is a very good illustration of what we were talking about a moment ago, programming by difference. I'm taking advantage of the code that was already there by using the display document method of the parent to write out the methods that I have in common with the parent, and then I'm adding on to that the new items that I want written out. Now, as an aside, suppose in the child, you wanted the display document method to write the attributes out in a different order. Well, you could do that, just don't use the parent display document method and put all of the right statements in there so that you get the order that you wanted. So not every time will you do what is illustrated here. The other scenario we have to keep in mind is this is a very nice situation because display document doesn't have any parameter passing. Sometimes what will actually happen here is in my call to the parent, I have parameters that I have to put in. And in that case, it works just like a regular old method call where I have to put in the values of the parameters the same as when we call a method from the main part of our program. Any questions about any of this? Now there's one method that works a little bit differently than what we have said, and that is constructor methods have special rules. A subclass may use the superclass constructor as it is, but if you think about what we have going on here, that's not going to work for us because our child class has two attributes the parent class doesn't have. So I need to address those in the constructor. So I have the second scenario. The subclass may create a new constructor, and here's the part of this that is different than all the other methods. I can create a new interface. So I can change the parameter passing associated with the child class's constructor. The subclass constructor does not use the keyword redefinition. So I can come back here and just like I did originally, and I'll put it where we normally put it, methods, constructor, not a redefinition because I don't use that keyword when I'm changing the constructor. And then just to save myself some typing, I'm going to go up here to my constructor that I created before and grab the parameter passing. So I want this constructor. It will need to take in a document number. It will need to take in a date. It will need to take in a document type. And so we'll follow the same rules as before. But this constructor also needs to take in a vendor ID, type C, and we'll do the same thing we did here. We won't allow for a default value for that. You're going to have to give us a vendor ID and company code. You're going to have to give us a company code. So my interface to my child constructor now looks different. You got to give me a document number. You can or cannot give me a date. You can or cannot give me a document type. You have to give me a vendor ID. You have to give me a company code. So that's what my interface to my constructor method looks like for the child. And then I'm going to do like I did here a moment ago. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to grab the implementation of this constructor. Now, I'm doing that to save myself some typing. And so let me actually show you some options here. I could do this right here, method constructor, and I could repeat this code. And so for right now, we'll do this just to illustrate that this works, but I need to add on my logic for what did I add to this? I've forgotten in my interface here. Doc number, date, doc type. So vendor ID and company code. So me, vendor ID equals vendor ID to process the parameter. Me, company code equals company code. All right, and so now we will hold our breath, see if I typed right, do a check, and I got something going on here that it does not like. Me can be, I think I skipped a line here. In the constructor method, me can be accessed only after the constructor of the superclass. Super constructor is called in the constructor method. Well, okay, so here's what I was going to say next, and we'll just look at the next point on the slide. If the subclass constructor wishes to call the superclass constructor, it can do so using this syntax right here. So in fact, what I need to do in my constructor method is I need to let it manage The document number, the date, the document type, and the number of documents. So,
In that situation that you have right now,
uh-huh.
is known documents known to the child class? Because it's not defined in the definition as an attribute, right?
It is an attribute of the parent. It's a public attribute of the parent, so the child can see it.
Super in front of that, or no?
I don't have to. See, if I get rid of, see, it didn't like these guys right here, and ultimately I'm going to. But notice if I do this to take them out, then it doesn't like me here still, but it has no problem with the line above it. So we're all good there. All right, so I want these lines right here, they're already in the constructor of my parent. So I'm going to use that code. So what I will do here is super constructor. And so now this is going to call the parent constructor. But if we look at the parent constructor, and this is where we have to be really careful here, the parent constructor takes in 4 attributes: doc number, date, and our 3 attributes: doc number, date, and doc type. So I get this lovely code here: doc number equals doc number, doc type equals doc type, and then what was the third one? Was it date or doc date? Doc number, date, and doc type. Date equals date. So what's going to actually happen here, and I'll put this on the board because this gets a little bit tricky, particularly for 8:45 in the morning. So here's my main program. And my main program creates a purchasing document. So it's going to come up here, and here's the purchasing document, and it has a constructor in it. Well, when I called the creation of my purchasing document, I've passed in certain parameters for it to use to create the purchasing document. So those parameters get passed up to my purchasing document constructor. But some of these attributes are going to actually be set by the parent, which is the document constructor. So what actually happens here is this constructor takes in these parameters and has to pass a subset of them back to the parent constructor, which is what we see going on here on line 69. And if I'm going to call the parent constructor, I use super constructor, and it has to be the first line of code in my child constructor. And so I do this, I pass it the document number, I pass it the document type, I pass it the date, but then I manage the vendor ID and the company code because my parent doesn't know anything about that. So we had some syntax errors the last time because of not employing this technique. Let's see if those have all gone away at this point. And they have. So the last thing that we need to do here is really make sure this is all working. So let's go back down here, and we'll drop in a horizontal line, and then I'm going to copy some code here. We are going to create object doc3. Actually, I missed my data line. Data doc3, type ref2, but instead of this being a reference to the document, it's going to be a reference to a purchasing document. And now I have to do different parameter passing. I'm going to set the document number to this for 9874. The document type is going to be P, but my constructor for the child also requires some stuff, and specifically it requires, got to find my constructor here for the child, purchasing document. Okay, doc number, which I have, date is optional, doc type is optional, but I set it. I need to set a vendor ID and a company code. So vendor ID equals ET, company code equals SU. So I should now have a valid call to this constructor, and so I want to display the purchasing document I just created. Now before we do that, let me do a syntax check and see if anybody has any questions. So here I just ran it. So I have 3 documents. I know that because I can count, but also because right here it says number of documents equals 3. And notice how at the time we had 1 document, my document counter said 1. I created a second one, and so it now knows there's 2. I created another one, it now knows there's 3. There's the document number, there's the default date of today, document type of P, vendor ID of ET, and company code of SU. So what I have done is these first 4 lines, you'll notice, are the same as the lines here. That's where I redefined my display document method to use the parent display document method and then tack 2 more lines onto the bottom of it. So that worked just fine. And obviously my constructor worked just fine. The only real complexity with the constructor is all the parameter passing I had to do. But I think that we'll look back at the code in a second there. That's just pretty straightforward. It looks like all the other parameter passing we've done this semester. If I'm going to call the superclass constructor, that has to be the very first thing I do in my subclass constructor. So if we look back at that code, in the purchasing document constructor, the very, very first line of code on line 70, or is it here, line 69, is the call to the constructor. Now, suppose I had a constructor like your last homework assignment that didn't have any parameter passing. I can still call the constructor of the parent class using super arrowhead constructor and the parentheses being empty. And I would still need to do that in order to take advantage of the functionality created in the parent class. Any questions about this? So what this actually means, to tie this into things you might have seen in other classes, given the above, the constructor is the only method in ABAP objects that is overloaded. You know, there are programming languages out there that would let you have 3 different methods that all have the same name, and the only way you separate the 3 of them is because they have different parameters defined for them. And at the time you call that method, the system looks and sees which one matches up with the parameters that you specified. We don't have that in ABAP, but we do have something like that with our constructor, because the parent constructor might take in 3 methods, and the child constructor might take in 5 methods. And actually the child constructor is available for us to use, and the parent constructor is available for us to use. So we have 2 active methods that share the exact same name. Any questions about this? We have one more fact to share, and then we're really done with our discussion of inheritance, and you'll get an opportunity to write a program. I would encourage you to write the program. It's one of your optional assignments, but it's not very long, and it'll give you good practice with this before the final exam. Everything that we just did was focused on focused on public attributes and public methods. And as you have seen in your coding so far this semester, we really haven't made heavy use of private components. And it's because of our ability to have read-only attributes in ABAP that we haven't had to resort to private attributes like you see in other languages. But what if we had a private method or a private attribute? What would that mean in terms of inheritance? Well, a private component, whether we're talking about either an attribute of or a method, cannot be referenced by the subclass. So if something's private, that means other classes can't see it. Well, if something's private, even the child can't see it. So if I had a private method called special display doc, the child class couldn't see it, because it being declared as private. So the question then would become, suppose I want to create something that's available to the child class, but still private to the rest of the world. I can actually have a protected section. And the idea here is that if I'm going to have a protected section, it is a section in the definition of my class, just like where we've seen public and private before. And the idea here is that protected resources are visible in the class, and they're visible to the children of the class. It's very similar to saying this is public for me and my children, but private to the rest of the world. So in fact, whereas up to this point we've talked about a public section and a private section, now we see that in actuality there are three potential sections. A public section, a protected section, and then a private section. And that is the order that they would appear in our source code if we intend to use those. Any questions about that? We employed a static attribute in the class that we just wrote. So you've seen this. A class shares static attributes with its children in the same fashion as other attributes. A class shares static methods with its children, but this is kind of an odd characteristic. You cannot redefine a static method. Just the overall model for ABAP objects just does not permit that particular opportunity. And that's all I had to cover by way of object inheritance. So we've written the code here. I will put this code up in D2L as a document that you can download to use as a reference. But like I said, you do have one optional homework that leverages ABAP objects, inheritance, and I would encourage you to do it so that you practice this before the final exam. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a way that you could do a method that could get something like you've been doing, like sets, like in a way, like you've done one with setting the attributes, and can you do one with the get attributes or whatever it's in the attributes they have in the class?
Yeah, you can write a getter. It would work exactly the same as the methods we have seen here. And to tie that back to what we were just talking about, if I had a private attribute in the parent, and in that parent I would have a getter and setter method that probably would be public. And the child could reference those getter and setter methods because they were public. But if for whatever reason I had a private attribute and I did not have a public setter, then the child class couldn't set that attribute, just like any other class could not set that attribute, because it wouldn't have a way to do that.
Okay.